Thanks everyone for coming in. We've got John Moran here from NOAA's OC Laboratory. OC Bay Laboratory.
Yep.
We're going to talk about humpbacks, and if you found this interesting, if you like humpbacks, we also have a movie night tomorrow night at the USFS building up on 2nd Street by a couple from New Caledonia who've done a lot of whale watching and some work with scientists. So they have a movie that they've put together and they're going to show for us on our regularly scheduled time. So please join us for that. Turn it over now.
Okay. Thanks a lot. This is a version of a topic that is in Sitka, so hopefully it applies to everybody here. I'm working with Gulf Watch Alaska, so I get my plug-in for them. That's a Trustees Council funded project with the long-term monitoring, which is kind of the partnership to the herring project. Anyway, let's get started here. So humpback whales in the North Pacific, this is a huge success story. And I think they have a pointer on here. Which one is the
center button.
Center? Okay. So just back in the late 60s and 70s, estimates were around 1,500, 2,000 humpbacks in the North Pacific. Then a big project in mid-2000s, around 2005 and 6, was a population estimate. They came up with about 20,000 humpbacks in the North Pacific. So that's a 5 to 7% annual increase in population, which is huge. Historically, some people think the pre-whaling population is down around 15,000. So some people believe that we're now above the historic abundance of humpbacks in the North Pacific. Just to put that into context, Ron Heinz, who I work with in Juneau, he thought that 20,000 humpbacks was about 7.5 million people as far as their energetics go. And Alaska has just over 700,000 people in the population from the recent census. So that kind of puts that into context what that means in whale biomass. So what does this mean, all these new humpbacks in Alaskan waters, and how does it affect you? How does it affect me? We're hearing lots of different comments from people. They may be competing with fisheries. They may be competing with other fish, with seabirds, with other marine mammals. We hear a lot of this. They're eating all the herring. They're eating all the salmon. They get caught in fishing gear. There's collisions with vessels. These are some of the negative aspects. There may be these complex ecosystem effects, and this is just a way of explaining things that aren't really direct. A good example of a complex ecosystem effect is like the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone. That helped out trout. It helped out trout because the wolves kept the grazers off the riverbeds. The rivers, the vegetation grew up, made it shade, provided bugs and good habitat for trout. So somehow wolves helped trout. This is like one of those really complex things you don't initially think about. So I added that into there, and then. Especially in Southeast Alaska, a lot of people are making a lot of money off of humpback whales. In Juneau, that industry is going through the roof. 4 or 5 new boats every year being added. I think they charge $150 a head, doing 3-4 trips a day. Anywhere 200, 100 people on a boat. So somebody's making a lot of money off of them. Just to give you an example, I don't know if you guys can see this in the light. This is Seymour Canal, and I think these are all humpback blows. I counted them at one time. Actually, Heather here took this picture, and you look out across the horizon there, and there are 100, 200 whales in an area that's about the size of maybe Port Ravina, Port Fadago. Not a very big area with maybe 250 humpbacks there, and they're there from October through into January. So that's that much biomass in that small of an area. It's got to have some kind of impact. So humpback whales aren't fish, and everyone knows they're mammals, but I'm just putting this up there as researchers sometimes, they kind of generalize humpback here, like, a king salmon does this, it eats herring, it does this, it goes here and there, and people kind of generalize that humpbacks do the same thing. Some will say, what does a humpback eat? Oh, it eats krill. You can say, what does a moose eat? It eats willows, and it goes to here in the wintertime. But humpbacks are a little bit more complex in that they're not quite as easy to predict on what they're going to do. So I like to use the analogies that they're more like fishing boats or like skippers. They're kind of individuals, they do their own things. And if you start thinking of them as more, how would a skipper operate? That might get you into the mind of a humpback So I'll try to follow through this analogy a little bit here. Here's a video clip that I hope will help illustrate some behaviors that are kind of more like skippers than like, say, a salmon. Okay, here's a mother and a calf humpback. Here's the little calf right there. This is down in Seymour Canal. This is like purse-seining. This is what's happening here, basically. Here's the mom. If you watch her, she's picking her flukes up really high and slamming them down. Kind of hard, but she's not getting a lot of forward momentum. I can tell from that behavior and that there's lots of small gulls, mute gulls, and Bonaparte's gulls around that she's feeding on something small. And she's eating krill or euphausids now. Fluke comes up really high, and what she's doing is she's herding them in. Krill move slow, they're not fast like herring, so everything's kind of in slow motion. Flukes come up, slaps them straight down. She's making a wall of bubbles and corralling these krill together. She nice black flukes. So she's basically closing the purse up now, staining up. You'll watch her come in here. She's kind of rolling on her side. She's probably got a pectoral fin underneath there, herding things in, tightening the purse. Really concentrating this prey up. And that's not her. That's another whale that just came through. And she had black flukes. That's a white fluke whale. So 2 whales just came through after this mom just did all this work and crashed in on her set. So that's something you might see in the fishing community. It wouldn't be very popular, but that's what just happened. She's going to come up here, and if there was audio, they do this thing called a wheeze blow. It's a really angry, that's her blowing. She's not very happy. One whale taking off there, the other one's going to pump up in a second there. They basically just crashed through her set, took her food, left mom and calf with nothing. So that's kind of a move that you would expect a not so reputable fisherman to do. So how are humpback whales like skippers? They're the same size as a lot of boats. They're pretty big animals. They catch a lot of fish at a time. Not a lot of predators do this massive, bulk foraging. But krill or fish, one big engulfment. They have a lot of different techniques they use. Like here's a humpback whale skimming the surface near the shore. Here's a group lunge in southeast Alaska. So a lot of different techniques, just like you might expect fishermen to do. They have different preferences. Like there's whales that like to eat herring, there's whales that like to eat krill, there's some that go back and forth to both. They have their own little niches as individuals that they kind of cash in on. Sometimes they cooperate with other whales, just like sometimes fishermen work together, and sometimes they work solo. They get tangled in gear, they collide with boats, just like fishing boats do. They sometimes fish in closed waters. I have a little segment on that we'll touch on. And finally, like a lot of fishermen, they all head south to reproduce. So quickly I'll go through the ecological role of humpback whales. These guys are generalists. They're taking in about 15,000 gallons in a gulp. That's a big gulp of seawater and prey. They really want to concentrate their prey. They want more food, less water. You're eating almost a half ton of food per day. That's pre-Witteveen's estimates from Kodiak. And these guys are generalists. They eat everything. They'll eat euphausids or krill, which are little tiny zooplankton guys, like that long. They'll eat herring, sandlance, capelin. They'll eat adult salmon. Sitka Sound, they've been seen eating adult pink salmon and adult red salmon. So they're feeding at a lot of different trophic levels. Herring can eat krill, salmon can eat herring, whales can eat all of them. That gives them a big advantage in the world of foraging. And this makes them competitors with just about everything out there.
So do they swallow those salmon whole?
Yes. Yes, they do. And I think they're getting most of those salmon when they're returning. So when the schools are really dense coming back in the fall, that's when they're targeting them. So humpback whales, they like to play with their food. They like to concentrate things. More food, less water is what they're after. So they use bubbles. They'll blow bubbles in an arc and try to herd the herring together. So things like herring and capelin that school up and ball up, that's good humpback prey. Things like pollock or maybe eulachon that don't form those dense balls, that's a little bit less desirable. If you can scare your prey into a tight ball and then take a bite, that's a better deal. They'll use their body parts, like you saw, they're using their flukes, they're using their pecs. They'll use the bathymetry to kind of concentrate things and get the prey into a denser ball. So Here we have some bubble nets here. That's a group bubble net from southeast. So they're really adaptive animals. Most of your whales and southeast whales head to Hawaii for breeding. A few go to a couple other places, but for the most part, they're heading to Hawaii, which gives their prey a break in the wintertime, at least for part of the winter. So humpbacks, you can identify them by their flukes. They're all individuals. Some are harder than others to tell apart. So they look different. We can kind of monitor individuals, and because we can tell that they're individuals by their appearance, we can also tell their behaviors. And that's what leads to some of these shenanigans, that when you can start following individuals and see what they're up to and see what kind of trouble they're getting into. Okay, the first thing I touched on was the impact on commercial fisheries. You know, the Japanese do a lot of research. The Norwegians do, saying humpback or saying whales in general are really hard on fisheries. A bunch of studies on that. We're looking at kind of a more specific case. So we look locally in Prince William Sound, Sitka Sound, and in Lynn Canal. And there was a lot of circumstantial evidence that implicated humpbacks. The fishery's been closed in Prince William Sound for 18 or so years now. No recovery. The circumstantial evidence points towards humpback numbers are really up. Herring numbers are down. Humpbacks eat herring. Humpbacks eat krill. Herring eat krill. Is something going on here. That's what we're trying to get at. And what we found, at least in Prince William Sound, is 15 to 20% of the pre-spawning biomass is probably being consumed by humpbacks. Humpbacks aren't taking a set quota. They're not just taking 20%, but because the population is so low right now, that's what it turns out to be. So that's significant. That is an impact on the local herring population. And how important are these guys as predators? We looked at some studies of other predators that Mariano's a part of, and Jordan Watson. And on the grand scale of things, humpbacks are pretty big players when it comes to what's eating herring in the Sound. So they are important here. So this is my fishing in closed waters segment. I think most of you guys are familiar with the salmon hatcheries or salmon enhancement facilities. They have these little net pens. So you get the salmon, you strip the eggs out, you hatch them in incubators, and you release them out into these pens, and you fatten them up. And then you pull the nets out and you release them. Along the east side of Baranof Island, the humpbacks have figured this out. So let me get this to play. So these are the same net pens with the nets removed. The fish have just been released. I'll try to get this to play. Okay. These are bubbles from a humpback whale. You can see these are coho smoke that are jumping. There's a net pen with the net still in there. Humpbacks blowing bubbles. The poor little naive hatchery fish probably don't know what a predator is. And then he comes up. Whoa. And there goes your hatchery production. And he does this over and over and over again. So you'll watch him, he'll swim up, he'll do another loop. So not only is he using bubbles as a barrier, he's using the net pens as a barrier. And these hatchery fish don't disperse really fast. So for things like coho and chinook, you spend a year feeding those. So there's a lot invested in a chinook smolt. They pull the net and they all just kind of sit in these net pens with no net. They're waiting for their next meal. I don't know what they're doing, but they're just sitting there. They're not going anywhere. And the humpbacks will come up right in there and just eat them all. So Hidden Falls Hatchery, I think one year they think they lost 80 to 90% of their chinook production in a couple of days. So these guys are cued in on that. It's like a garbage bear. Once they figure it out, they're not gonna forget about their free meal. And these are no hatchery fish. They're all fattened up, ready to get released into the wild. So an easy meal. And the humpbacks have overcome their fear of nets and everything else to come in there and get them.
Is it the same humpbacks every year?
It is the same ones. But the problem is, somebody else is going to learn that technique. So you need to figure out how to not let that get happen. So discards, another fishing boat analogy. Discards are what gets tossed over the side of boats. Heads, guts, bycatch. We think that we see a lot of predators hanging out with these humpbacks. Seabirds hanging around, getting herring or whatever. It's being tossed up by them. In southeast, we had this group of sea lions, and they're stuck to these humpback whales. They're so stuck to them that we're trying to tag the whales, and the sea lions are right there with them. They wouldn't give up their humpback if it was diving down. So we figured something's going on to make the state of that whale so close with us chasing after the whale with tags. So we think that the whales are somehow making it easier for other things to get their food. And as the population came up, maybe these other animals are cashing in on us. This is one of those kind of complex effects that we didn't really anticipate with the recovering population. Okay, to be in a big school or a little school, that's a decision. This is going to be really quick, this one video clip here, the first one. This is the Ditson sonar, and Scott has one of these here now, which is pretty cool. So it's like basically an ultrasound. So we're looking down through the water column. These are individual herring. They're probably about this big. You know, I think they're recruited in the population. We're down at, this is probably set at 50 to 100 meters, looking down, out 10 meters. At nighttime, so there's no light. This thing isn't using light. It uses sound waves to make this image. And I want you to watch as the herring scatter, and you'll see a sea lion come through this school. It's real quick, so I'll try to play it a couple times. So can you guys see that okay? I'll hit it again. Let's do it one more time. So anyway, that's nighttime, and as you can see, that the herring aren't seen, but they're using their lateral lines. It's like if a bear came in the back of this room and everybody started running, like I would need to see the bear to know that it's probably time for me to run if everybody else is running towards me. And that's what's happening with this. It's a big school of herring. A predator comes into these herring one at a time. Somebody panics there, and it's kind of this chain reaction, so everybody gets out of the way. That's a really good strategy if you're being eaten one at a time. You've been in this real big school, let your neighbors warn you of a predator. And I think in these attacks, we saw the sea lion getting, maybe 1 out of 10 attacks, the sea lion was successful. So that sea lion's diving down really deep, 50 to 100 meters, chasing these herring around in the dark, and they're mostly getting away. So here's a little school. So this is a harbor seal. Now you're a little school near the surface. The advantage is you get a lot more food when you're a little school because you're not competing with everybody else. The disadvantage is that now this little harbor seal has the, kind of make up the school. They'll come in closer. This harbor seal has complete control over the school of fish. He's got them in really shallow water, and he basically, he's hardly swimming. He'll do a little lunge every now and then. He'll ball the fish up again and just keep picking away at them. So he's got all day to eat these little herring. And there's not much they can do about it. They're trapped in shallow water. He's safe from killer whales. The killer whales aren't going to get him there. And he just munches till they're all gone. They just keep balling up, and there's not a lot they can do about it. So the advantage of being in a little school, you probably get more food, but if the predators find you, you get eaten. Okay, so we made some observations during some of our fall and winter work. We looked at these herring schools. So these are just echograms. This green line is the bottom of the ocean. These are herring schools. And here we have about 100 meters in depth, 50 meters in depth. And we saw when there were a lot of whales around, these herring schools were all broken up. There's little groups near the surface. They're not really hunkered down hard in the bottom. And as soon as the whales left, the herring went down hard on the bottom like this. So down almost, 120 meters and stuck hard on the bottom. So real differences with whales there and with whales not there. This is in Lynn Canal. So we thought, well, maybe these whales are stirring up the herring. So we came up with a schematic diagram to explain this. So we think that if you're a herring and you're being eaten by a seal or a sea lion or a bird or a fish, something that's picking you off one thing at a time, there's a different strategy. Because the humpback is going to come and eat all of you and all your friends. So your friends can't warn you if you're all getting eaten together. So it's a little bit different strategy. So when there's no whales around, we think this is the best thing for herring to do. Go down really deep, hunker down on the bottom. You're forcing the air-breathing animals to swim out and dive down really deep, use a lot of energy, burning up oxygen. exposing themselves to predators maybe, and doing those deep dives. And you're in a real big school, so your neighbors can warn you. That works good unless there's humpbacks around. This is what the humpbacks want. Really dense, aggregated prey. 150 meters doesn't really mean anything to them. So now this guy just crashes through all these herring and gets an easy meal out of it, which breaks up the school and makes an easier meal for the sea lions. So we think this could be happening during these winter aggregations of herring. So the whales come in, there's lots of injured fish. We think that's why the sea lions dive with the whales, or maybe picking up scraps, or when the whales dive, the herring schools spike up, maybe a little bit shallower, so the sea lions aren't working as hard for the meals. So that earlier echogram was the vertical distribution of herring. This is the horizontal distribution. So this is in Lynn Canal. Purple circles are just aggregations of whales. So here basically a lot of whales. Red is really high concentrations of herrings. Blue is a lighter concentration of herring. Notice the biomass here increases between December and January. This is 1 month apart. And as what we see is with a lot of whales, herring are really spread out. Sea lions probably have a bit easier time. As soon as the whales leave, and the whales are leaving to either go to Hawaii to migrate for reproduction, or in Southeast Alaska, there's a big krill production that comes online in Frederick Sound. So some of the whales may be leaving the herring to go eat krill instead. Anyway, once the whales leave, these herring get really aggregated. So most of the herring are in this one spot. I think this is 90% of the herring are in the red. A couple whales still hanging on here. Now you're forcing the sea lions, if you're a herring, this works out well, because here's the sea lion hollow out here. You're putting them out here in the open, making them dive really deep, and that exposes you to killer whales. So it's almost like the herring are using killer whales to take some of their pressure off. And in fact, we saw 7 sea lions get killed in 5 days on this group of herring. So before, if you're a sea lion, you might as well hang around this island, stay close to shore, get a little small school of herring, eat it all day long, work with it. Now the herring are bringing you out of the deep water, away from shore, exposing you to killer whales. So that's one of these more complex effects that we think might be happening. The whales are stirring things up, making it easier for some predators, making it harder for others. So that's this complex ecosystem effect. So we see a similar story down in Seymour Canal, which is about 80 miles south, except here it's krill. And this is where we have over 200 whales. They're there from September, October, November into December. 4 months of which we think would be the lean times, getting into winter. And these whales are just stirring up krill, bringing it up to the surface. And we have mew gulls, herring gulls, Bonaparte gulls, and surprisingly like thousands of long-tailed ducks kind of cashing in on this. And there may be tens of thousands of birds all feeding with these whales. So that's a big boost of energy during a relatively lean time of the year. So are marine mammals and birds benefiting from all these whales being around? We think on the short term they might be. This is a picture from right outside of out of Port Marina. This humpback whale just happened to spit up about 500 herring. An adult-sized herring is about the same calories as a Big Mac. So these gulls just choke down 4 or 5 Big Macs in a couple of minutes. That's a big boost in the middle of winter for you calorically. So it's helping out these birds on the short term. On the long term, we don't know. Are they out competing seals and sea lions? In the big picture, we just don't know. There's not enough research to get to that. But it could be. It could be that whales are, things like merlets. They eat the same food as a lot of the seabirds, and they may be better at it. And there's a lot more around than there were, 20 or 30, 40 years ago. So now I'm going to talk a bit about entanglement. That's another repercussion of all these new whales that are showing up. This is a Sitka Sound herring fishery. I just talked to Jan Straley, and she said there's probably 100 whales down there now. They're in this. And somehow there may have been one caught. There's a rumor one was caught this year, but they surprisingly don't get caught. I've been out in the middle of a gillnet opener in Lynn Canal. I'm out there in my boat doing water samples. Didn't realize it was a noon opener. 200 gillnetters crank their diesels up. They're throwing out nets everywhere. I'm panicking, trying to get through the nets. Don't know what to do. And I watch this humpback just pick its way through all those nets and get through. So they're good at getting through nets, but they do get caught. More nets, or there's probably not more nets, but there's a lot more whales around. Usually the juvenile whales are getting caught, but they do get caught. And that's going to be an issue. No one wants their gear wrapped around a net or around a whale. So we're working at trying to find ways to resolve this. In Southeast, people are putting pingers on their nets, humpback whale pingers, just to warn the whales there's a gill net there. We have a disentanglement network. I think they might have done training up here. Ed Lyman might have done, and that's when whales get caught, we go out there, we try to untangle them, we try to figure out if it can be done. You know, we're not out to save every whale. Human safety is first priority. It's pretty dangerous being around a large animal with a lot of tangly gill net wrapped around it, but we do what we can. Here's us throwing some disentanglement gear, trying to hook on. The idea behind getting these whales untangled is basically what the whalers used to do. You get some gear on it, you put a bunch of, it's called kegging. You put a bunch of buoys onto the whale and try to slow the whale down, tire the whale out, just like you would if you were going to harpoon it. Get in close and try to figure out how this gear is tangled up in the whale. So what you don't want to do is run out there and cut that buoy off, because then you've lost it. You have no marker on the whale, you can't find the whale, you can't hook into the whale, and basically the whale just swims off with the gear and you never find it again. This is a really clever idea that, I don't know if it actually worked or not, but Jan Straley and the Sea Swap group, this is to keep sperm whales off of longline gear. They put acrylic balls on the ganyons. These balls have the same reflective, same acoustic signal as a black cod. So the idea was, the sperm whale can't tell a black cod from an empty hook. I don't know if it really worked out, and they're still looking at it, but I thought it was a really clever idea. Collisions. More whales are going to mean more collisions. Big boats are really bad for whales. Here's a minke whale in the bow of a cruise ship. I think these cruise ships hit a humpback, they lose like maybe a quarter knot of speed. They barely perceive it. Generally wind up killing the whales. They get stuck on this bulbous bow. How many whales get hit and don't get stuck? You know, we don't really know. Here's some prop marks from a big boat that hit that. Anyway, this will be an increasing problem as whales and ships come into more contact. Big whales are really bad for small boats. These are a lot of images from around Juneau. Here's us tagging a sperm whale to give you an idea of the size of a whale. Here's some prop marks. Whale watching boats around lunging whales. This is an interesting photo that a woman in our office took. This is there's trolling for salmon. If you look at her face, she doesn't even know these whales are here. These whales all came up right next to them. They didn't have a clue. The guy's driving the boat. She's working on a downrigger. You know, whatever it is, 8, 11 humpbacks came up right next to it, never saw it coming. You know, if you're in a kayak, that could be a really bad thing. So if you're in a kayak and you want to get close to whales, this is something I have just something to think about. A humpback whale landing on you in your kayak is like you landing on a tomato. And they're probably not going to hit you, so getting back to my fishing boat analogy, like say it's like one of those 30-minute herring openers in Sitka. The captain's, bearing down a seine on a school of herring. You're out there in your kayak. Is he going to stop? He probably doesn't want to hit you, but what is he thinking? And that's what I have to think. That could put the whale's thinking. He's going in, closing his big money set on a group of herring, and you're out there piled in your kayak. Maybe he knows you're there, maybe he doesn't. He probably doesn't want to hit you, but if he does, you're going to come out second best. So just something to think about throughout. They're really close to whales. They don't want to get you, and they'll probably try to avoid you, but a whack with a pectoral fin or a fluke, and you're probably crushed.
Does it happen often with kayaks?
I
haven't heard of it up here.
There are a lot of small boat, but it's really underreported. Ones getting hit. Like I know how many people tell me, oh yeah, I've got hit by a whale, you get knocked over. I don't think there's been any deaths, but there's been some boats sunk. Sailboats have been sunk, ones have been sunk. But as the whale numbers go up, and as the whales get used to being around boats, here you don't have, I don't think you have the same number of boats and whales mixing together like we have in the southeast, where there's 30 to 40 whale watchers on these groups of whales all day, every day, throughout the summer. They get kind of immune to the sound of boat noise. They're still trying to make their living, and boats are getting bumped, and it's a breaching whale sunk a sailboat off of Huna. So there's a lot of incidents, but a lot of them aren't getting reported. You hear, oh yeah, I bumped a whale bumped me, and It's a matter of time, I think, as the whale numbers go up. So I'm not just going to pick on humpbacks. Lots of other marine mammals are doing really well since the Marine Mammal Protection Act. You guys are well aware of sea otters. They're doing really well in Southeast Alaska right now. Waves of them are coming across. They're competing with the dive fisheries, the crab fisheries. California sea lions are taking over docks. They're eating endangered salmon, you know, at dams. Sperm whales, I mentioned before, are stealing black cod off the long lines and halibut off the long lines. Stellar sea lions, they're hitting trawl gear. They're getting into gear here. You guys are probably well aware of that. Killer whales are doing the same thing, picking fish off the long lines from trawl gear. So we have this recurrence of these marine mammal populations. They're doing really well, and we're going to have to find a way to somehow deal with this. So how do you stop all these marine mammal shenanigans? Well, they're protected under the Endangered Species Act, most of them, for the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So you can't just go out there and start shooting them and killing them. Nobody really wants to do that anyway. They're smart animals. You've got to try to outthink them. I don't know if that's always going to work. But we think that, you know, with scientists and fishermen and managers, if everybody kind of puts their head together and comes up with clever ideas or prevents things from happening, like stop them from getting the hatchery fish, you know, nip it in the bud. You know, those are some ways we can hopefully have a peaceful resolution to some of these conflicts. And I really think that the local solutions are the issue. A lot of these species are managed by out of DC, and I don't think that we can have somebody in DC saying you're going to do this, this, and this, and this with your marine mammal issues, because they're different. They're individuals. They act. You know, this whale might be causing a problem here. Let's treat that whale and solve that problem, as opposed to something else. You know, what's going on in the Bering Sea might not apply to Prince William Sound. So it's kind of a group effort, and I think it needs to be at the local level, and that's probably more an issue with getting people in DC to listen to local people and have them accept their input, not just kind of throw out these blanket policies, which they sometimes can do. And you need to have local buy-in. That's key. If fishermen don't buy into it, or local people, then it's not going to work. You know, you can't enforce laws over the state of Alaska without buy-in, because it's too big of a place. Anyway, kind of the bottom line is that we're going to have to figure out how to live with a lot more humpbacks in the world. And the real bottom line in terms of dollars is that there are a lot of people making a lot of money off of humpback whales. And right now they're probably worth more in the state's herring fisheries in terms of dollars coming in. So there's money to be made. If you don't care about whales or the ecosystem, you probably care about money. And you can hopefully find a good way to capitalize on that. Anyway, that's all I have. Thanks a lot. I can take any questions if you want. And any of the herring people want to comment on my ideas on the herring and the whales? I didn't realize we used a herring-intensive audience.
Could you kind of describe for people the hotspot areas here in the Sound? For
Yep.
whales and
Yeah.
the timing here?
So they kind of change. So right now, probably the hotspot area, I'm hoping it's going to be Port Ravina, Knowles Head, Redhead, the spawning herring. It seems like in the summer they're probably more spread out as the prey is more spread out. And then starting in September, October, it seems like the herring are coming in around Montague Island, and we see a lot of whales there. And the whales are basically following those herring up. So into November, December, into Port Ravina would be another good spot. And last winter they seem to linger off at the tanker anchor area, kind of off of Redhead and Knowles Head. There was a school of herring there, and then the whales stuck around there. Before the last few years, it was easier. They seemed to be more predictable. Now, our last winter surveys, there was a lot more in the way of zooplankton out there, and the whales were spread out, and I think they were getting zooplankton. So if anyone knows why there's more zooplankton, or if there really is more zooplankton, it seems like the whales are eating that. A lot more euphausids we're seeing. The whales were not so concentrated on euphausids, which could be the key. I think euphausids are easier for whales to get. They're high in energy. Herring are good at getting away from things. They don't want to get eaten. And if there's this alternate prey there, that could release the herring from the whale predation. So more krill would be a really good thing for everybody. And hopefully somebody knows what's driving the krill populations. It's not me.
But in summer, are they the same numbers, or are there more here and there?
I think that I haven't done a lot of summer surveys, but I think they're coming with the herring in the wintertime, the fall and winter. And that's what we see in at least around Juneau, they're really peaking in the fall. As those herring come back in big numbers, that's what they're after. And those herring are fat, you know, it's the end of the summer, herring have a lot of calories, it's a good source of food, and they're aggregated, so it's a high energy, dense prey source that they like to cash in on.
So they're probably more out in the Gulf in the summer.
Yeah, and there may be krill out in the Gulf too. And I just don't know what's going on out there. I'd like to, but I don't.
So there must be some research going on using sound as a deterrent, you know, sea alarms,
so
things like
the
that.
problem is, they're protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So you can't just go and scare a whale. There's talk about, the pingers were a big deal. I think they kind of got approval from DC, but they didn't want them putting pingers out. So it's a passive, you know, just a sound to keep them out of the nets. And that was a hot topic. That was not something that everybody wanted to see happen. They said, oh, you're putting too much noise in. Because technically, if I went out there and, you know, scared a sea otter, that's a take under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So you can't alter their behavior for harassment. So
Yes, we ought to bring in a naval destroyer and have them work their sonars.
yeah, but so that was kind of this contentious point. You know, well, we don't want them hitting our nets, and you know, what are the agencies going to say? You know, well, you wouldn't let me put a pinger on it, hit my net, and got caught, so it's kind of your fault. So it's I think they're getting it worked out now, and I think there are some pingers being used, and the hatcheries, I'm not sure. So there's some exemptions under the Marine Mammal Protection Act for commercial fisheries for protecting your gear. I don't know if those apply to hatcheries or not. So it's a lot of legal, political stuff mixed in there, and that's why it makes it hard to work with these animals. Humpbacks are up for being delisted right now, the North Pacific population. A group of Hawaiian fishermen have petitioned to delist. NOAA was working on a delisting on their own, and then Parnell, or Doug Vincent Lang, one of the fishing game, is petitioned to delist one of our stocks up here. So that's all going through the review process now. So they may be delisted next year or so.
There's been talk about using bubbles, like near Heaven Falls. Have you heard them talk about that?
Yeah.
Possibly using bubbles to deter the whales from coming into those net pens. They try to drag the net pens out and release out into the channel, and they let them out, and the fish will just stay right by the net pen, and the whales are still. So if they try to drag the net pen, so bubbles may be a deterrent. They're still working on it.
Yeah, they're trying different. Like, I used to work at Esther Island, the hatchery there, and we had the release strategy at the time when I was there was to release fish at night in mass and overwhelm the predators. So we'd go at night, keep the birds from getting it, and then this big mass of fish would go out there, and the idea is that swamps the predators for fish and seals and sea lions. But that's exactly what the whales want. They want a big slug of fish going out. So they may have to, change release strategies, make them more like a natural system where you trickle fish out, just don't give them that big tempting target. And those hatch releases, I mean, they're fat little fish, and they're kind of naive. I just have this image of the whale coming up, and the hatchery fish think the whale's out of their net pen, and they feel safe, and they'll dive into their net pen. I'm not sure if that's what happened. But you saw in that video, like the ghosts, they're still catching bugs on the surface. They seem oblivious, and that might be one of the downsides of hatchery reared fish. They're not as wary as a wild fish. So.
No, it's not just whales that do that. That's why they have remote release sites here to try to get around that problem.
Yeah, you know what? Because the predators know, and they're not. They can't.
And even the pollock come to the hatcheries when it's release time.
Yeah. And we're trying to figure out
when a fish is smart enough to do it, you're in trouble with marine mammals.
And so these whales are hitting the hatchery. They come and they make little circuits. Like they're checking it out to see if anybody's been released. So they have their little routine, and so you can kind of change the dates maybe, but they'll poke their nose in. Oh, nothing's going on yet. So we're really trying to figure: is there some cue? Are they queuing on more boat activity or more? Can they hear when they pull those nets up? We don't really know. For the sperm whales, we think they're queuing in on. Boats going in and out of gear with a boat hauling their gear back. You're in and out of gear a lot when you're hauling back your long line gear, and that's what's cueing the sperm whales. They'll just sit there, and then time to pull your gear, and then they come just pick them off the long line. So it's an easy meal. I mean, the idea is these animals are smart. You've got to try to outsmart them as best you can. Or not let them figure out that that's an easy food source in the first place. That's probably the better solution.
Do sperm whales navigate with echolocation?
Yes, they are really,
Humpbacks don't.
no. Humpbacks haven't been documented using echolocation. There's some mega clip thing that people are looking at now, but they don't have the right apparatus. So that, like, if you got a killer whale or a dolphin have that kind of bulbous head, that's the melon. And sperm whales have taken that to the extreme. So sperm whales are really good at focusing sound and echolocating. They're experts at it.
That's why we never catch those unless it's the same.
For
A gillnet, the toothed whales,
they can probably detect it.
yeah, they never hit them.
Yeah.
The humpbacks, the juvenile humpbacks are getting the serious problem.
It seems like the juveniles are the ones that are causing the problem, are getting tangled more. And that's where those pingers might come in, but they have to associate the pinger with the net. But generally the adults do pretty well at it. It's amazing how they dodge nets. I don't know how they do it, but they do.
If entanglements become a larger problem, particularly with the juveniles, is there talk about enforcing whale safety or putting breakaways in people's nets as far as a mandatory?
They do that on the East Coast with North Atlantic right whales. I'm not. I think is what you want to do. First of all, you don't want to sink your boat. That's the first thing. If you get whale all the way under the gear, is not. You got to keep yourself out of harm's way. Generally, what I've been told is if you pull back hard on the gear, the whale can bust through and break through the webbing. That happens a lot. If they start wrapping up and rolling in it, you're probably going to have to cut it so they don't, I think most of the gill netters around here, they could probably sink them, and that's, yeah, they're
So breakaway isn't going to help in that
it's not going to, yeah, if they're wrapping your corks and your lead line, breaking away is not going to help the whale, I guess. It might help you, but you cut your line. But once it gets wrapped around the animal, it's, they sometimes shed the gear on their own, sometimes they don't. There's a lot of research being put into that. And it's also pot gear is another thing, like try to keep, like our personal use shrimp pots and crab pots or commercial gear, they get wrapped in that, so you don't want a ton of extra floating line up there. Yeah, it doesn't happen enough that there's a real pattern you can pick out, but that's what Ed Lyman, he's out of Hawaii, he's working on it. He's trying to, he takes all the gear he gets off the whale and analyzes where did this come from, what was the entanglement, the whale tree itself, and yeah, it's an area of research, I guess. But for North Atlantic right whales are critically endangered. There's hundreds of them left, so that's a big deal. For humpbacks here, there's a whole lot of them, so it's not on the radar as much. And I don't know if people have been seeing more entanglements up here or not. And it's probably just a function of there's a lot more whales around.
So if humpbacks don't have active sonars, they must have excellent hearing.
I think that's
on Tail Beach or something like that.
I think they have pretty good hearing, and that's what they're. Yeah, I guess I don't know. You can maybe add to this. Like their perception of the world is that they're hearing waves crashing on the beaches in Hawaii, possibly. And that's how they're finding Hawaii. But their sound travels really, really well underwater. It travels far and fast, so they probably got a pretty good idea of what's going on. Whether or not they use all those cues, I think they're probably finding herring by sound. Because herrings seem really loud to me when I put a microphone down. I think that helps them find things like herring. And they're probably just, they've got the little circuit. They cruise around and they find prey. They stop and eat it. They move to the next spot. Jan's doing some work with olfactory sensing. Is it dimethyl sulfide? Is that the chemical? It's a chemical produced by herring and by krill. It's in the breakdown of phytoplankton. Birds like the tube snouts use. There's some birds that use seabirds that find their prey using scent. Some evidence that humpbacks may be doing that too, or some whales maybe moving into the wind and finding these concentrations of prey. But it's kind of a mystery how humpbacks find their food, I guess.
Aren't they calling each other out?
They don't do as much calling on the feeding grounds. There is a feeding call they do in southeast, and that's maybe up here now. Maybe they spread. It's this cultural thing. So the bubble landing that we see in southeast Alaska, It's a group of whales, they come together. One whale blows a ring of bubbles in a spiral around a school of herring. And then it's tighter and tighter, and that ring collapses and it concentrates the herring and pushes them to the surface. Then all those whales come up through the center of that school. That's those pictures I showed you. They come up through the center of the school and they all get a bite. Fred Sharp, who works in Frederick Sound, he thinks that they may use vocalizations to herd the herring. So there's this ring of bubbles, and then one of the whale is just screaming, like outside the bubble net. And his idea is that sound doesn't penetrate through the bubbles. So if you're a herring, you're inside this bubble, and then you could swim through the bubbles, but if you stick your head out there, there's this really loud screaming out there, so you go back into the center. And that's his idea. They're also using their pectoral fins. Like they're white on one side, black on the other, and you can flash that to a school of herring. Like you flash it black and white, and that makes those herring ball up more. So that could be how they're using sound to kind of even contact their prey. But that's still an area of research too. They're just good at, you know, making balls of fish tighter and tighter and then eating them.
You mentioned krill a little bit. I was just curious, what's kind of the level of human exploitation of krill in the Gulf, and do you expect that to increase in the next 5 or 10 years? Or
I don't think there's an Antarctic krill fishery. I think the Japanese are taking krill. I don't think there's any krill fisheries in the
I hadn't heard of it, but I was curious if people are going to start moving into that here, because it's huge. I mean, Southern Ocean, it's
Yeah, I don't think,
krill.
someone can correct me if I'm wrong. We can't fish on forage fish in Alaska, is that right, except for herring? They aren't really a forage fish. So there are no, in krill by NIMS, National Marine Fisheries Service, calls krill forage fish. So we can't fish on forage fish in Alaska, except for herring, which are an exception. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah.
So there's no, it's probably a really good thing. You don't want to hunt it at the base. They do in the North Pacific. They catch sand lands and cave land and things like that. But we don't do that. Nothing else? I'm going to jump on a boat, I think. Okay. Okay. Just stick it in the water.